Right, hi everybody. My name's Alistair. I work for Plantlife. As I think it says behind me, we are the global voice for wild plants and fungi. But as I always say, and I'm very biased, I get the best job because I get to look after what we do in Scotland. Part of that job is managing our Munsary Nature Reserve away up in Caithness. What I thought I would do over the next 10 minutes or so is just give you a wee bit of an update on what's happening on the nature reserve. But I'm aware that there might be some people here who've never been to Munsary. Amazing though that seems. So I'll give you a bit of an introduction to the site, tell you a wee bit about the habitats and the species, and then I'll give you an update. I've called it the highs and lows. I promise not to spend too much on the lows and just shout if I sound too grumbly. Plantlife manages 24 nature reserves across the UK, not very evenly distributed across the UK. We're managing to protect habitats and species, to demonstrate good practice, to try to influence other land managers and also influence government policy and to carry out research. And I think that we deliver all of those objectives at Munsary. So up in Caithness and Sutherland is the vast flow country, that huge expanse of blanket bog, and Munsary lies there in the east of the flow country. Our site is about 2,000 hectares, which sounds big until you realise that the flow country itself is 200,000 hectares. So we manage a small part of a much bigger site. This is a map of the reserve. So we manage the areas in the purple solid line and the purple dotted line. You can instantly see from this map that we're not in pristine blanket bog environments, and we're surrounded on three sides by coniferous plantations. I'll come back to talk about that a little bit later on. We're also not just the Plantlife Nature Reserve. There's a whole host of designations, protected designations, SSI, SAC, SPA. These all point to, and a proposed World Heritage Site, which I'll chat about as well a bit later on. But these all point to how good Munsary is for its wildlife, for its species, and for its habitats. So what kind of habitats are they? Let's jump into having a look at the habitats. It's a blanket bog site. What does that mean? In very broad terms, it ranges from quite heathy, quite boreal sort of environments through to what you might think of as typical blanket bog in the mid-altitude parts of the site, all the way through to these amazing dew lochans, this complex pool system which is kind of scattered across the surface of the northern part of the site. An amazing, amazing place. And these pools are a real feature of the flow country. But as with anything, any ecosystem, the more you look, the more complex it becomes. And Munsary is no exception. So we've recorded 35 NVC communities and sub-communities on the site. You don't need to see this in any detail, but this is just a description or an indication of one of them. So this is M17 and its variants, and all those microhabitats interact with each other in really different ways and in very dynamic ways as well. So Munsary is a peatland site, so it's really important that we understand what the peat is doing. And I just put this map up just to show you the variety in peat depth, which goes from around about 1 metre in the green areas through to about 7 metres in some of the deeper areas. It's quite interesting that some of the deeper areas of peat are on some of the steeper parts of the site. And maybe, I don't know, maybe there's some correlation between the peat depth and that M17, but that's something to look at. So in terms of the species that we've got on site, so front and centre, we've got obviously the sphagnum mosses, the most important species on Munsary and in the wider flow country. The original ecosystem engineers, the bog builders, they create this habitat. And we've got an amazing diversity of sphagnum mosses on Munsary. In fact, every species of sphagnum which is found in the wider flow country, in that 200,000 hectare expanse, is found on our reserve, which shows maybe how good it is. We've got a whole range of the more common wetland plants that you would expect, including some of the most extensive stands of grass of Parnassus that I've ever seen. We've got Scotland's largest colony of marsh saxifrage, which is a lovely feature to have on the reserve. And we're working with Aline and the botanics. In fact, I think some of our mash saxifrage is now here in the nursery at the botanics, which is very, very cool as part of the project there. We've also got, well, I kind of say we've got bog orchids on the site. Bog orchid has been recorded on the site, but not for a few years. It's a very good record. I've never been able to re-find it, but I've never put a huge amount of effort into it. So if anybody's up for helping me re-find bog orchid on site, then that'd be brilliant. Okay, so it's not just the plants. All those designations show us how important the site is for a whole range of species. Got really, really important breeding wader populations, load of breeding dunlin, golden plover, greenshank, a colony of Arctic skua as well, golden eagle, white-tailed eagle hunt across the reserve, and we've got breeding hen harrier, short-tailed owl, and merlin as well. So it's a pretty amazing place. And in the spring, it's just full of life. But just thinking about some of the issues, some of the work that we're doing, Munsary, well, very few bogs in this country are intact or pristine environments, and Munsary is no exception. This is a view of Munsary Cottage, which is actually an old Victorian shooting lodge. It's ruined now, built on this mineral outcrop in the middle of the reserve. But there's been settlements here for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and people have left their mark. You can't really see in this photo, but there's extensive peat cuttings around about the cottage, and radiating out from the cottage and across the nature of the reserve, there's a network of drainage ditches as people are trying to drain the site, to dry it out, to make it suitable for grazing livestock. Obviously, when you drain a site, that is lethal to the habitats and the species that we're trying to conserve. So we have been carrying out an extensive programme of peatland restoration, blocking those ditches. We've put in about 1,000 dams so far. We've got another phase of peatland restoration coming up, doing another 9K or so of drainage blocking, reprofiling, peat restoration. That will result in probably just a bit more than 81 hectares of peatlands being restored. So that's an ongoing programme funded by the Peatland Action Fund. Okay, so another thing that takes up a lot of my time is these beautiful creatures, not the wind farms. The deer. Now, deer are a natural part of any blanket bog system, but in high numbers, deer can really damage that fragile surface vegetation, trample and erode the sphagnum, expose the bare peat. The wind and the rain get in, create more erosion. We lose the habitat. We emit huge amounts of carbon. And as you'll know, across Scotland, deer numbers have really been escalating in recent decades, and Munsary is no exception. So this graph here just shows you what the deer numbers at Munsary have been doing between the years 2000 and 2019. And when you talk about deer, you tend to talk about their density per square kilometre. In 2017, officially, we had 12 per square kilometre. I think it was probably a wee bit higher than that. We've been working really, really hard to get the deer down to an optimal density. It's very, very difficult. Our neighbours don't always have the same land management objectives that we do, and deer, particularly on a blanket bog system, are very, very difficult to control. But it is important to know the densities, but ultimately what we want to know is what impact the deer are having on the vegetation. So that's why we carry out herbivore impact assessments. And here's Oliver doing one here last year. This is a really good way of us being able to track how our management is changing or allowing the bog to change in response to what we are doing. It's a good technique. It's quite a rough and ready technique, but it's a very useful one. What we're going to do this next year is follow it up with a much more in-depth survey, which we do every 10 years or so, that gives us like huge, detailed information. The last thing that we're working on is this. So remember back at the start, I showed you that map. We're surrounded by non-native conifer plantations. They don't stay inside their fence. They seed out onto the bog. They're drying the bog out. And they're really causing huge problems. They change the habitat, they destroy the habitat, essentially. They also allow predators, mammalian predators, usually pine martens, to come out over the forests and prey on those breeding waders, which is a bit of a nightmare. Now, this area and this area are managed by Forestry and Land Scotland, and they have moved for us the boundary of their forests through clear felling to try and give us a bit of a buffer zone. So that's kind of what's happening now. It looks quite extreme when they've done that, but it does start to come back. The vegetation starts to come back. What seems to happen, one of the first phases, is that you get this very, very cotton grass dominated environment. But I think this will move to a more natural bog ecosystem over time as the cotton grass beds down and other species can move in. So it's a long transition process. But even in the interim, we've got that buffer zone. But let's not end on a grumble. Let's end on a high. There's a formal bid being made for the whole flow country, including Munsary, to become a World Heritage Site. So a big, big process of application that was led by Highland Council and Nature Scott. The application is with UNESCO now, and this summer we took UNESCO assessors out onto the bog in the rain to give them the full blanket bog experience. At least luckily they brought their umbrellas with them. But we will hear next summer whether the flow country has been designated or awarded World Heritage Site status. And if it is, then it would be fantastic for the nature reserve, fantastic for the flow country, and a real accolade. So thanks very much. Big thank you to our research partners, the Environmental Research Institute and the University of East London. We wouldn't be able to do any of this without them, and the Flow Country Partnership that we work really closely with. Please come and visit if you haven't already. We've got a leaflet, happy to talk to you more about it. And yeah, it'd be wonderful to see some of you up on the site. It's an amazing place. Thanks very much.